And many of you know David. He's been on the Kriya Yoga podcast. He's a student of Roy Eugene Davis, and he's been a minister in the tradition of Kriya Yoga since 2011. He's an educator and a coach, and he's currently, I think, even right now, almost done with his training as a psychoanalytical psychotherapist in the Lacanian School of Psychoanalysis. So, if anyone has some insights on what it means to master our states of consciousness, I think David's the right man for the job. So, David, wonderful to see you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me. And thank
Yeah,
you
I'm
all
going to
for
go ahead
joining.
and turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, it's great to see such a turnout for so early in the morning. What comes into my mind, it being a Thursday, is why aren't you all at work? But I won't ask too many questions. Um, I am calling in from Ireland, and knowing the nature of Ryan's work and his offering teachings online, I'm presuming that not all of you are in the US. So I thought, as a way of using the gimmicks of Zoom, that maybe I could get a hands up for anybody who's not in the US. Yeah. Okay. So I'm not alone. Okay. Very good. And now I'm just flicking through the pages here. I can see I have to scroll through 3 different screens to see just who's on this call. Yeah, so quite a few hands up. I think this is something which is quite powerful when it comes to our being part of a tradition such as the Kriya Yoga tradition. It was something that was I experienced when Ryan came over to Ireland here last year, and something which was commented to me, that when there's a willingness for people to travel from all corners of the world because of a desire, fundamentally a desire to experience something other than what they usually experience, something beyond what can be spoken about, it's quite moving. And even though we're all here in the virtual world, so to speak, um, it's still quite moving to see, as I said before, so many people not having to go to work and show up and take part in a weekend retreat. So, as Ryan said, I'll talk a little bit on mastering our states of consciousness, although, it's quite a lofty or a grandiose suggestion that I, unlike what Ryan said, I should be the person to speak about this, but um, whatever I say will point towards that in some way or another. What we might begin with is just a little grounding meditation practice. So if you just want to get yourself into a comfortable seated posture, just for 10 minutes or so, we'll just practice together. So sitting relaxed and upright, take one clean inhalation through your nose, fill your lungs, and then exhaling long and slowly. Close your eyes and allow your body to relax. And feel the weight of your body, the weight of your physical presence as you're seated on your chair or on your cushion. Feel the pull of gravity drawing you down into your seated position. Become aware of the sensations occurring within the body, different movements, not so easily to label or discern or define, but nonetheless noticeable. You can just take a few moments to appreciate the body doing what the body does to keep itself alive and functioning. And this is your body, your apparatus, your vehicle for navigating this world. And what goes on within it can only be experienced by you. And so now, seated in your private space, free from the demands of the world, you can celebrate your capacity to express through this mind body mechanism. And we know from our meditation practice that how we relate to the different movements which occur as a consequence of the functioning of this mind body system. We know that we can relate to these at a gross level. And using different practices, we can facilitate our moving into more subtle levels of experience. We know this. We've had a taste of this. But right now, as you sit here, grounded in your seated meditation posture, taking these few moments to reflect, perhaps such profound experiences won't come about. Such subtlety won't be directly experienced in these moments. But awareness is constant. And so whether what's taking place is happening at a gross level or a subtle level or an extremely subtle level is irrelevant. Awareness is always present. And given the circumstances as they are at present, the fact that consciousness is being processed through the mind body system that you have been given, awareness incorporates that experience. Awareness incorporates the experience of the words that I am speaking. It incorporates whatever movements are taking place for you, physically, emotionally, mentally. It incorporates and witnesses and observes all of these. It itself unaffected. And so we'll just take a few more minutes to celebrate this experience. The experience of being at a fundamental level as awareness, but also as a manifested expression. And we can just sit with the tension that arises as a consequence of the pull towards outward creative expression and inward stillness and observation. This is a short practice, a simple reflection, preparing us for this time we're spending together to listen, to hear, to receive, to reflect upon, discern, question, pull apart, interrogate, analyze. Everything awareness itself doesn't do. But we can acknowledge that awareness celebrates itself through this expression. And we can join the party as an invited guest. Until such time as we realize that the party is actually for us. We're the one to be celebrated. There's only one to be celebrated. There's only celebrating. And with that in mind, or not, we can begin our celebration. So I invite you to chant Om once with me to conclude. Om. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the focus of this workshop, I'm not inclined really to call it a workshop, because a workshop gives the idea that there's a bit more interaction than there might actually be. Also, a workshop gives the idea of something a bit more tangible and direct in terms of what we're experiencing. If we use the word workshop to include something of a reflection, then we can call it a workshop. Um, but I like the idea of considering this a reflection. There's nothing conclusive that we might arrive at as a consequence of this session together. There's no definitive solution that's going to be presented, so to speak. But there's an opportunity to celebrate. Celebrate why we have actually gathered here in the first place, which is for us to be able to experience yoga, self realization. That's the goal, the objective. That's what yoga is in our English terminology, self realization. And so our gathering here with a shared objective is involving us in a process of doing, engaging, participating, getting involved. And while, as I said, it might not allow you to necessarily partake in a way where you are sharing as much of your ideas in a workshop manner, you're still providing yourself with a space to be at the party, to celebrate, and to acknowledge your own determination in your own adhering to the practice so as to experience the end goal, adhering to the practices of yoga so as to experience the end goal of yoga. Now, with this kind of reflection, it becomes challenging because of how we go about listening to it. How are we actually listening to the reflection? You'll know yourself from your own musings as you're driving to work, or your musings as you're standing in the queue in the supermarket waiting to pay, your own reflections that you engage in the privacy of your own mind, that there's an awful lot that is articulated. And some of it stands out as being memorable, something worth holding on to. And in fact, we might even get our phones out of our pockets and actually start taking notes. That's worth remembering. I should write that down. And then there's an awful lot which is ignored and other stuff which is dismissed. Who prioritizes what's of most relevance is no one but ourselves. It's our own inner workings. And we're the one who's navigating, mediating, regulating what's going on. But there's so much that we dismiss as being maybe useless, unhelpful, or maybe it's just that we just don't want to actually consider it. Because if we do consider it, we're considering something which is too much for us to actually chew. And so we prefer to focus on that great soundbite, that great insight that we had, and write it down and keep it at hand, maybe even put it on the fridge so that we feel supported in our practice in a way where we're in control, it's all manageable, and it's moving in the direction that we want it to move. Now, the apparatus, the thinking apparatus, is a very, very tricky one to be able to define or understand. And yoga, the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, offers a way for us to start to think about our thinking processes and what's going on at a mental level. But that in itself is not the end goal. That's not what yoga is. The idea of mastering your mind isn't about you being able to master your thinking processes in a way where now your thinking is perfect. The thinking processes occur as the thinking processes occur. And mastering your mind, that's more related to the thinking processes becoming neutralized, being of no interest, losing their potency, having no residual effect that keeps us entangled in the processes of the mind. So there's something for us to reflect on here. When we talk about the mind, we're talking about my mind and you're talking about your mind. And we have a appreciation because we can reconcile that what we're experiencing may be to some degree similar. The human condition is a shared experience to a degree, and that the apparatus which is allowing us to experience it is a shared tool, a shared mechanism, a shared function. And so, in that way, we can kind of say, well, I understand the nature of the mind in terms of it being a shared experience. But then, how that is actually experienced, the particular of that, how I experience it, how you experience it, and how your neighbor experiences it. How are we supposed to quantify and equate that? It becomes more challenging. So then we hear this idea of mastering the mind. I'm going to master the mind. And at this point, I'll just make mention of the fact that Ryan said I had a more colorful way of talking about the four states of consciousness. Because when I originally put forward my idea for this talk, it was mastering the mind and the other games we play. Because I think when we have this notion of mastering the mind, all of a sudden it puts us in a position of power, a position of control, where we're in charge. And while that's not untrue, there's truth in that. What's not being looked at is the greater truth. Who is in charge? So when we say mastering the mind, who is mastering the mind? Who has that power? You say, well, I am practicing yoga so that I can master my mind, and then I will be self-realized. And there's a part of that narration, that way of phrasing things, which is perpetuating, it's continuing on the delusion. Now, you'll know what I'm talking about if you've been involved in yoga for any length of time. There's great attention given to the ego and the idea of the ego being the cause of our ignorance. And so this is nothing new. But the challenge is for us as we listen to this to recognize that the one listening is the ego. Right here, as we're engaging, you're listening to the words I'm speaking, the apparatus, the tool, the mechanism which facilitates all of this shared interaction that we're having is the ego. And so we measure things out, we quantify them, we'll take things on and we'll reject other things, we'll create a filtration process where what's been said is being assessed as to what degree it's in accord with what we already hold to be viable or true or relevant for us, or what has already passed our measuring system, what's good enough for us. And this becomes challenging then, because that whole filtration process is being set up by the ego. And the ego is here now in this room and engaging in this workshop. and it's listening again, and it's activated in the very same way. So as I'm talking, you'll have your own ideas, you'll have your own responses, mental responses, you'll have your own energetic or emotional reactions. You may even have your own physical reactions. Your body might, as a consequence of something you've heard, become uncomfortable. You might end up deciding in that very moment when something is said which is particularly um, provocative for you, that you have to scratch a certain part of your body, or that you need to move in a certain way, or this is the moment when I need a glass of water. This is the moment when I just need to check to see if that curtain is moving because of a window being open. This is the moment I need to do it right now, because that thing that was said has touched my filtration process in such a way where it has caused a movement, a reaction, and it's brought about a restlessness, which has now caused me to become distracted from the very thing that I've taken time off work to be part of. So we can think about this at a certain level as a type of resistance, a resistance to wanting to actually engage in the very practice that we want to engage in. What's coming into my mind there is I suppose, a type of anecdote is, couples, one of them will say, would you like to sit down? We can cook a meal together. We can spend the evening together, maybe watch a movie, these kind of things. And the other will say, yeah, yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. But then as the evening progresses and they engage in it, the partner who made the suggestion starts going, I don't know, you're looking at your phone a lot. You're not really, doesn't really seem like this is what you want to be doing. And then the second partner answers, no, 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 this is where I want to be. No, no, it was just a message. I just needed to send that. I won't be looking at it anymore. What do you want me to do? How can I help? Um, and then the evening continues like this. But the more signs of there being a distraction in partner B, then partner A is going to start to lose confidence in their actual wanting to take part. Now, this is two people interacting with each other. As we engage with the practice of yoga, we may find, and I think from my own experience, I found that we can have the determination, the motivation, the willingness to participate and engage in yoga practice, and specifically here, Kriya Yoga and the teachings. And we can be very determined. But we can get to a point when we start to lose confidence in our own willingness, our own keenness, our own determination. Because we find ourselves becoming distracted. We find ourselves falling victim to our own restlessness. And then we're asked, the question isn't voiced by anybody, but we're forced to face the conundrum of, if I'm so into this practice, and if my goal is to experience what it says can be experienced, then why is it that I'm doing all this other stuff that contradicts my own enthusiasm? And we can think back to the romantic couple where partner B is, you know, Ryan said, I'm involved in psychoanalytical psychotherapy. The partner B might show up in the therapeutic clinic and say, I don't get it. I really love this person and I want to spend time with them, but I'm just not engaging in the relationship in a way where I myself can feel like I'm really confident in my own wanting to be in the relationship. And so this conflict arises, and this conflict is real. It's a very real experience. And the trickiest thing about it for any of us, especially if we're going to relate it back to our yoga practice, is that it can leave us feeling unsure. And nobody wants to feel unsure. Nobody wants to meet their yoga teacher, or nobody wants to show up at a retreat where they have a very strong admiration for the tradition and they want to be able to engage, but they know because they have lived with themselves that they're not fully in it in the way that they had anticipated that they would be. And so they show up at the retreat and they have all of this almost schizophrenic dialogue going on within them. And it's extremely anxiety inducing in some ways. It's definitely a cause of conflict. And so in the retreat, they give it their all. They go hard. They meditate the first day. I'm going to stay up all night. I'm going to meditate all night. The next day I get up, I'm going to be the first one in the meditation hall and I'm going to be there for the talk and I'm going to, have my socks pulled up. I'm going to have my seat all ready to go and I'm going to really do this. I'm really going to do this. I'm going to do it so well. It's going to make up for all the last 2 years of less, let's say, more distracted type of practice. And so they give it their all. And this is good. This is, there's nothing wrong with this. This is a kind of a realigning with the intention, realigning with the focus and the purpose, and it's good. What most people experience, however, is that when the retreat is over and they're fully charged, that life comes in, and then there's certain circumstances, life conditions, demands which come from the external world, but also the demands which come from within. And so after a retreat, our demands that we make of ourselves are usually, well, I'm going to continue this. I did really well in the retreat. So now that the retreat's over, I'm going to make sure that I meditate. I'm going to do 2 hours in the morning, I'm going to do an hour in the evening, and I'm going to put a half an hour in at my lunchtime. And you know what? After I finish my lunch, I'm going to go for a walk for half an hour. And I'm going to do all these things. And there's no real notion given to the fact that the day only has so many hours. It's more just about where we are in terms of how keen we are to engage. But this is our own demand of ourselves. And it's now in direct competition with the demands of the world around us, life that we are engaged in. And so we find ourselves experiencing a tension. And this tension we've put in place. Nobody else has put it in place. We've put it in place because we want to be good yogis. The challenge that's going to come about for us is our tendency to become distracted, to be moved away from our intention. Now, this is quite a complicated thing to talk around because there's many variables at play. There is, however, one common denominator, and that common denominator is us. We're there all the time. Whatever's going on, we're there. So we're there and we're experiencing ourselves as something other than a master, something which doesn't really quite match up to our idea of what a master should be. We find ourselves lacking. And so we'll have moments then where we go, okay, well, I need to compensate because I'm experiencing this and it's not good. I didn't meditate for as long as I wanted this morning, but when I get home this evening, I'm definitely going to meditate for longer. I'm gonna make up for what I didn't do this morning. Or maybe it's not about our formal practices. Maybe it's about our informal. Okay, that conversation wasn't really how I wanted it to go. I know that that wasn't really in accord with the yamas and niyamas. It wasn't really in accord with the values which are outlined within yoga. Okay, you know what? I'm going to try extra hard. The next time I meet that person, I'm going to be extra good. I'm going to be extra friendly, extra kind, extra nice. And so we start having these negotiations with ourselves based on the fact that we are now confronted with our own lack of mastery. What is it that we're lacking mastery of? Well, we say the mind. We're lacking mastery of the mind. But as we said, the mind is very complicated. And as we sit here, the physical body has its own processes, its own functions. And we're not so hard in it. We let it do those functions as it needs to. We allow it to continue with its functions. We allow the blood to flow. We allow ourselves to continue breathing, although maybe there's some very hardcore practitioners out there and they're trying to hold their breath for the whole workshop. But generally speaking, we allow our physical body to do what it is set up to do. The energetic body, we can refer to it as the emotional body, we allow it to do what it does too, to a degree. But in this circumstance, if there's energies being experienced in the body, we'll allow them to just do what they are inclined to do. At certain times, they may cause discomfort, and so there's a physical response, or they might cause a discomfort that triggers mental processes. But we generally don't get caught up in the biochemical processes which are creating our emotions. We just let all that run. Where we get hung up is in how we think about it, the thoughts it triggers, and are not liking those thoughts, not liking the feeling. And the feeling is nothing but a label for what is a very abstract, energetic experience. We give it a label, and then we badmouth it. We rant on about it. I shouldn't be feeling like this. Why am I feeling like this? I'm so blessed. I'm able to take the day off work on a Thursday and join in a retreat. I'm so blessed. I'm able to be here and do this. Why am I feeling like this? I'm taking part in this retreat and I'm feeling that it's this way or that way. Why am I having these thoughts? Why is this going on? But these are the functions of the mind. These are the processes of the mind. The mind serves to filter what's in accord with our preferences or what is discording with our preferences. That's the nature of the mind. And so there's nothing really that can be done about it. That's its whole game plan. So when we talk about mastering the mind, how are we to go about changing that game plan? If we talk about mastering the physical body, does that mean sitting still and being able to sit still for the rest of your life? Does it mean that you go to the gym and that you build up a body that is able to endure and has stamina to run marathon every weekend? Maybe, but there's limitations to all of these things. So in terms of mastery, we can talk about mastery in relation to physical activities, such as playing the piano, or mastery in being able to speak a language. But if you talk to anybody in those fields, they'll always say there's more to be done. So mastering the mind, we can go about doing this in a very rational, logical way. But the mechanisms that we're using to do this very rationalizing and logical um, investigation is the mind itself. And as I mentioned at the beginning, you're listening to words and you're hearing this talk, but what is being heard is being filtered by the mental processes, which are all working in accord with the ego. So we show up here, we show up with an idea of what we're going to experience. We have an anticipation, kind of an imagining. This is what it's going to be like. And especially because the workshop was titled Mastering Our States of Consciousness, you would have had a certain idea of, if you had read the title, what this might be about. And so you come with this idea in your mind. And you sit down and you're ready to go. But the processes, the mechanisms which are at play at a physical level, at an energetic level, and at a mental level are the same processes that were at play before you engaged in this. And the same processes which were at play when you were signing up to take part in this. The same processes which are at play when you even encountered Kriya Yoga. Those processes are always at play. They are the byproduct of what it means, or they're the very product of what it means to be human. This is what inaugurates or kind of initiates the human condition, these functions, these processes, physical, energetic, and mental. So we're setting about mastering our mind. And it's the mental processes, as it's shared within Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. It's the mental processes which give way to the ahamkara, the I maker, the ego. So the four aspects of mind are outlined. And one of those aspects of mind is the ego. The ego in relationship to what's being processed through the sense organs, and the ego in relationship to what's being processed in the deep mind. What's being processed through the sense organs. Some of that might be at a conscious level, some of it might be outside of consciousness, not at a conscious level. What's being processed in terms of our deep mind, our storehouse of memories, some of that can happen at a conscious level, where we can consciously recollect. And some of it is outside of consciousness or unconscious. And the ego uses all of it to substantiate its sense of importance. So the I maker is continuously making the I. The I is something which is being reconstituted in every instant, continuously. And it's being reconstituted by what is given to it through the manas, sense mind, or the chitta, deep mind. So the ego is reliant on what's taking places, these two levels of mind, in order to reconstruct itself in every passing moment. So I can come on here, and Ryan did a very good job of introducing me. I could try to do the same. I could come on and say, well, I'm David and I'm from Ireland, and I'm involved in sharing the principles and practices of Kriya Yoga. And I'm also in my formation as a psychoanalytical psychotherapist. I've been practicing Kriya Yoga for so long, and I could go into the whole story. But in a different setting, I could come on here and I could say, well, my name is David and I have two sisters. My parents are both living at the moment. and we do our best to look after them, and I can talk about that story. Or in another setting, I might come on and I might start saying, well, my name is David, and I started out as a graphic designer. And after having traveled a little bit, I realized it wasn't for me. And I could go down that story. And what is it that determines what the story is or the way that I present myself? What is it that causes me to go in any particular direction in terms of how I structure myself, in terms of how I construct myself, in terms of how I identify myself? This is reliant on external demands, on the context of the situation. And so I adapt. And so the I maker is skilled in adapting. It has developed the capacity to shift how it creates itself within any given context. You go to a dinner party and you're meeting people from work and you present yourself in one way. It's New Year's Eve and you're with your family, you present yourself in another way. On some occasions, we have those awkward moments where we're meeting people from different social circles and we have to navigate what it's like to play the role of, in my case, it might be a husband, or in your case, it might be a wife or husband, a mother, a father, and then it might also have to be a boss or an employee, where you're trying to navigate what it's like to wear three hats at the same time. And we say hats, but what we're talking about is the capacity of the I to shift in how it constitutes and presents itself in accord with the situation and the demands that's been made of it in a certain context. And this doesn't always go according to plan. Or we have those business meetings, or we have an interview, or maybe we're participating in a retreat and we have a conversation with someone, over the dinner or on our way back to the dorm or after a meditation, and we say something. And afterwards, we're left with the echo of what we've just said. And we're thinking, that wasn't really a good presentation of me in this context. At the meeting, it might be, why did I say that? Now I'll never get the promotion. At the retreat, it might be, a master wouldn't say that. An enlightened person wouldn't say that. Somebody who is really practicing meditation would never say that. Or somebody who's really practicing meditation would talk more like this. This is how things should be. And so we have our ideas based on the fact that the eye maker didn't do a very good job as presenting us as the kind of I that we wanted to be within that specific context. We feel cheated. We feel inadequate. And we're left with ourselves. And then we go back to our rooms, or maybe we go back to our partner and we start telling them about it. Oh, I shouldn't have said this. Why did I say that? Now they're going to think this. Or it could be positive. It could be, I said this and now they're going to think that I'm really good yogi because I do this all the time. But in any case, the interaction, the social interaction, has put a demand on our ahamkara, our eye maker, to present us in a way which is relevant to the context, to the circumstances, to the social setting, in a way where it's going to make us appear as ideal as we would like to appear. And in our heads, we can feel the tension of this. Because in our heads, we know at a deeper level that there's a lot of inconsistency in this. Even as I sit here talking, I'm presenting a talk on mastering the states of consciousness. Prior to this workshop, I had lunch. I was talking to my fiance. Conversation had a different air to it, more jovial, bit of flirting, joking, things which you would expect in that kind of context. In this kind of context, this is not what's happening. So we know ourselves to be an accumulation of different selves, an accumulation of different us's, that we are not just how we present ourselves to be in any one situation. And there are people in our lives who have the privilege of seeing us in this kind of spread out version where what we're hiding or what's not revealed, let's say, within a certain context, they know that it's not being revealed because they know us. Within a certain interaction, they'll know that we are maybe putting it on a little thick in ways that maybe the person listening didn't, but they know because they know us. And so those who are close to us get to see the way we wear our hats, or those who are close to us get to see how we reconstruct ourselves according to the demands of the social situations, as complex as they might be. And so those who are close to us are also known to us. We get to see them. And this kind of proximity, this almost an invasion into our privacy, an invasion into our own innate sense of discord, our own sense of not being able to weave a consistent thread through every aspect of our life. The fact that there's somebody there who's able to see that we are shifting. This person we say we are shifts according to the circumstances, the context. And as it shifts, we feel it ourselves. On our own, we have to deal with that innate conflict. But now, when somebody's close to us, we're exposed, feel vulnerable. And in certain ways, this is the magic of an intimate relationship, that it leaves us wide open to be seen for the creation of eyes that we are. And their variability. They're not fixed, they're shifting. But we come, I have in my head the sounds of Ron Linden. I remember being at a retreat in CSA, and he was giving a workshop on meditation. And if you ever had the privilege of listening to Ron Linden, he was very good excellent, in fact, in outlining very complicated theoretical concepts in a very story-like manner. And Ron was talking about looking in the mirror, and how when we look in the mirror and we look deep into our own eyes, we wonder who's in there. But the words that kind of echo in my mind is, I know who I am. We know who we are. And I always remember him putting it to the audience who was listening to him. We know who we are. We are who we are. And then the tag at the end, right? The American tag, right? In Ireland, it would be, we know where we are, don't we? So we know who we are. And we have a sense that we are entitled to that knowledge, that sense of security. I'm David. This is who I am. I know who I am. And now I can present myself to the world. Same as the way we engage in things. We talked about engaging with Kriya Yoga practice. Come to Kriya Yoga. This is my intention. This is what I want. This is what I'm going to do. But nonetheless, we find ourselves in conflict with the fact that we become restless, we become distracted, and we don't do it. And in much the same way, we arrive and we say, I'm David, or whatever your name might be. This is my name. This is who I am. This is what I'm about. And this is what I do. But we know there's far more to it than that. A lot more to it than that. But everything that we know of ourselves, the whole sense of who we are, where does it exist? Where is it that we define who we are? Of course, people will say you define yourself through your actions. It's not just in your actions that you define yourself. You define yourself in the things you say too. But these things, words and actions, they're things to be listened to be experienced, to be observed. They're things which can be interpreted. Which means that the person receiving them may make it an interpretation which is not in accord with what we have as the version of ourselves. So we exist as I'm me. I'm who I am. It's just the way it is. I don't know how to say it, but it's just what it is. That's what's going on. I'm me. But that idea exists in our minds. The idea is imaginary. We have an imaginary idea of who we are. And we use, as you've probably heard other speakers say at different times, we use narratives to support this idea. I'm more inclined to say that we reconstruct it continuously. The ahamkara, the I maker, it didn't just happen once. It wasn't, I'm making the I now, there it is, finished. The ahamkara is a process, it's a function, it's a mechanism which is continuously at play all the time, right now. And it begins with an idea of self, an idea of personhood, selfhood. But an idea is imaginary, it's conceptualized, it's not based on reality. And in that idea, it's ill-defined or poorly defined. You may have experienced, no, may have, you will have experienced when you have something in your mind which is extremely clear. It's all figured out. It's all very well organized. And then you go to give it expression. Could be through an action, or it could be through language, through speaking. But as soon as you do, you make a mess of it. And so what you had imagined as being very clear, very easy, you made a mess of. You may have had an experience where you had a friend, you ask for something and say, "Oh yeah, I can help you with that. I know how to do that. I'm very good at that. I'm, you know, why would you bother paying for someone? No, I can do that." And then you ask them, "Well, have you done it before?" "No, no, no, I've never done it before, but I've done these other things. It's very similar." And they have a whole vision of themselves, which is very convincing, very reassuring. And so you invite them over to your home to do maybe what could be a very simple job, and they make a mess of it. And then you're left with the aftermath. And you make an interpretation of them and their skills and their version of who they are based on how they've expressed it. Their work has revealed to you who they are, not the imagined version of themselves, which they can never fully express. That idea that they have of themselves, the idea that you have of yourself as you're standing in the supermarket line, the idea you have of yourself as you're sitting in your room watching this Zoom call, the idea of you have of yourself as you're cooking dinner, that idea of yourself, which is being reconstructed in that instance through the ahamkara, the eye maker, is interwoven with all the other ideas you have of yourself that have been constructed through the eye maker. And all of them become a kind of a medley of eyes, a sense of you that gets all kind of lumped together into something which is very gray. Gray, not as in it's not exciting, gray as in it's very um, hard to pull apart. Where did you start? Where did you end? Where are you now? What has informed it? What hasn't informed it? The whole thing. It's a mishmash, a hodgepodge, put together version of you. But in your mind, it all seems so clear. Sometimes. Sometimes we have experiences which call into question our sense of self and leave us feeling, well, in some cases, we can have an existential crisis. Well, who am I actually? If that's actually happened, I don't know how to see myself anymore. We've been so shaken up in terms of how we relate to ourselves that it causes us to be unsure of the whole mechanism. And for some people, that's why they get engaged in yoga practice in the first place. Some kind of life event or gradual accumulation of experiences, which just leads them to saying, this conflict isn't working for me. I don't know how to position myself in all of this. I don't know who I am in all of this. I want to find it out. I want more. I want the answer. I want to know. And so they're driven to find the answers. So we're left through the human experience, experiencing ourselves as some kind of reality, some kind of entity, some kind of person that in actual fact is imaginary. It's conceived by us in our heads. And it finds expression in the things we do and in the things we say. But that never matches up fully to the very complex, interwoven, multi versions we have of ourselves that we just lodge all together and call I. And we experience this directly when it comes to language, when we're using language. You know, a simple thing. I suppose I came on, Ryan said, "This is David." Maybe you have other Davids in your lives, other Davids that you know. Maybe there's a resemblance. Maybe they have a beard. Maybe there's no resemblance, but you like Ireland. So now you have a David that you know and you like Ireland. There's two things that connect with your imaginary sense of self, your ego. So straight in, there's a bit of a buy. But maybe you're somebody else who knows a David that you don't really like. Maybe you don't really like Ireland. Maybe you don't like the color green. Maybe you thought I should have had a picture of Paramahansa Yogananda in the background. Maybe you have a whole other version of what should be going on here. And so it doesn't match up to your imagined version of who you are, which is based on, as we talked about, all the social situations that you have readapted, reshifted, realigned yourself throughout all these years of your life. So you show up with a filtration system. We call it the ego, but we can say filtration system. It allows in certain things, it doesn't allow in other things. And it's going to be based on all the different variables that have been put together, pieced together in a very complex system, which now you simplify in the term I. In I, the utterance I, that subject pronoun I, is what we use when we talk about our practice. I practice yoga. I'm a Kriya Yoga practitioner. I am on a retreat. I'm listening to this Zoom call. So that I is getting caught up in this whole process. So the ego is intrinsically involved in everything that we're doing right now. You'll likely have heard spiritual teachers talking in the third person. They'll say he or she, or they'll maybe even use their name, or they might say the person, the speaker, or whatever. And it all sounds a bit weird. Why are they doing that? Because there's a recognition that any sense of existence that we have is entangled with our relationships, with the different contexts that we've experienced in our life, all the different social situations, all the different people, the demands that those different social contexts, those different cohorts of people have put upon us, and how we've shifted ourselves to be able to fit into each one of those contexts, how we overlap them or refrain from overlapping them, how we express ourselves one way in one context, another way in another context, how we navigate all of that. And it's very challenging to articulate it. So it's very challenging even just to get a kind of clear sense of it in our minds. But we've lived through it and we have a direct experience of it, which is the sense of conflict that comes when we find ourselves in situations where we no longer feel like we're fully us. I no longer feel like I'm fully I. Why is that? Because there's something else going on which I cannot put my finger on. There's something beyond what I know of myself. So the I, the me, the myself, that is something which is being reconstructed all the time. And we find ourselves on occasion in a circumstance, in a situation where that I, that me, myself, is having a problem constructing itself within that situation. It feels at odds. It doesn't have the right coordinates, the right variables to actually piece it together in the same way as you can piece yourself together when you're sitting at home on your couch with your feet up watching TV. There's a very strong sense of this is I, that's my stuff, this is my TV, this is my favorite program, this is where I sit. It's very strong, it's very condensed, it's very clear. But there are occasions when we find ourselves being pushed towards an experience where it's not easy for us to construct a version of ourselves. We can call it lack of confidence. We can call it low self esteem. We can call it anxiety. We can call it lots of different things because the experience of it is visceral. The experience of it is happening. But like we did in our reflection at the very beginning, sometimes there's things going on in the body that we can be aware of, but we don't have names for. We don't know how to articulate it. We don't know how to talk about it. But we are nonetheless experiencing it. And there's occasions in our life when we're experiencing ourselves as being totally disconnected from any sense of who we are. And it creates restlessness. It creates distraction. There's a need to fill it quick. Quick, get it back in place. Because if it's not back in place, then who am I? So this unpredictability, this sense, well, the innate aspect of the eye maker is it's working with what it's got available to it, the deep mind, its experiences, its previous experiences which inform the storehouse of memories. It's working with that, and it's working with the data which is coming through the sense organs. Collectively, together, the eye maker is doing its best to reconstitute who you are, your sense of self. It's doing its best. And there's moments when it doesn't work out as cleanly or as easily or in a way where it doesn't leave an after effect of discomfort. There's times when it can be very uncomfortable. So we know this, we've experienced it. And so we know that the I, the ego, is not wholly reliable. It does a very good job at putting itself forward as like your friend who knew how to put the kitchen together. It puts a very good job of saying, I'm good at this, this is what I'm doing, I know who I am. It presents this version of itself to the world. And it even does it when you're on retreat. And it even does it when you're talking to a spiritual teacher that you revere. It does it on all occasions. And it does it when we meditate. And so now this is where our challenge comes. Meditation in itself is not the whole premise of yoga. The focus, the goal is to experience self-realization. Meditation facilitates that. And it facilitates that because it allows us to pull apart everything which is substantiating, reinforcing the imaginary. Everything which is being conceptualized is being analyzed so that it can be understood, appreciated, directly experienced that it is nothing but a construct. Now, you have to be careful when you use the word construct like that. It can sound very matrix, conspiracy theory, all of this. That's where the celebration comes on that I mentioned at the beginning, because what we're living has its beauty, it has its quality, and intrinsic to it is the experience of hardship, the human body not reliable, nature unpredictable, human relationships challenging. Yeah. So these aspects of our experience of living make the whole experience dramatic, let's say. And the thing that facilitates that whole, our capacity to take part in it, the eye maker, it's what we hold dear. We have to. You may have heard the analogy of watching a theatre production if you're at a play and you watch the actors on stage and they have to buy into the role that they're performing. They have to take it seriously. They have to hold it as being what's taking place in those moments as they are performing. They have to. If they're thinking about anything that's not relevant, then they'll come out of character and the play won't be, well, might get a bad review, let's say. But as a spectator, we buy into it. We look on at the stage and we see them performing and we think it's magical. We're swept away by it. It's enchanting. And much is the same. We are the actors on the stage and we are participating in this drama and we have to buy into it to a certain degree. We have to allow ourselves to create an I. We have to have an imaginary sense of self to a degree. We have to, if we're going to be able to show up at a meeting and talk about ourselves, if we're going to be able to participate in interpersonal relationships where we have a way which is of interest to other people, where we can listen to them and they can listen to us and we can share experiences. There's a need for this to a degree. Of course, you can be that person who speaks in the third person and is very disassociated from the experience. You can be that person. Doesn't make it easier for other people to engage with you, but you can be that person if you want. So that's the role of the performer. And we have that role. And the reason we have that role is because it's through the performance that the celebration takes place. If there was no performance, then the person in the audience would have nothing to watch, nothing to be able to say, I am the watcher, nothing to be able to say, I'm the one who gets to observe and appreciate this. I have no performance of my own. I have nothing that I'm invested in, but I get to enjoy this performance, and that's my way of celebrating me. So we are the performer, but we're also the audience. We're also the spectator, the Purusha, the seer. So we can appreciate then that while we engage in our interpersonal relationships, while we move towards fulfilling and different desires and having experiences that we would find of interest, while we do all of this, we can also recognize that that is all caught up in an imaginary idea of who we are. What's separate to that is the aspect of us which is able to say, this is enjoyable. If there comes a point that the aspect of us, well, I was going to say that the aspects of us finds it unenjoyable, but the truth of the matter is it doesn't really have a preference. And this is a hard thing to swallow, but what's going on in our lives, favorable or unfavorable, it's drama. It's going on. It's life. Nature, it grows, but it dies. It has a movement to it, which allows it to perpetuate itself, to evolve, and to keep itself sustained and moving forward. And for this benefits the watcher. So the watcher, if everything was just all positive and moving forward, then that kind of tension wouldn't be created to allow life to continue to unfolding. The game would be over. So the trials and tribulations, the ups and the downs, they're all part of the drama. The watcher is indifferent insofar as it just watches. Like you watch Netflix. You engross yourself in different shows, as horrific, as traumatic as they might be, you allow yourself to do it. And there's parts when you'll have a smile on your face, there's parts when you won't be able to look at the screen. But you're celebrating in a certain way that experience, you're enjoying that experience. The Purusha, the seer, it doesn't have a preference for how that life unfolds. Us, as practitioners, we're recognizing that we are experiencing both. We are creative manifestation, we are an expression of Prakriti, we are part of that in our mind body system, but we're also Purusha. We can focus wholeheartedly on the Prakriti, but then We get so entangled in it, we take it so seriously that we become trapped on the stage and we have no way off, and our character is just subject to ongoing ignorance and, as a consequence, suffering. But we can also appreciate our essential nature as consciousness, or I would rather say awareness which is able to just be aware. So if the performance gets really, really quiet and everything kind of subsides and all the actors are asleep, awareness is still there watching. They come kick into position and they get going and they're moving again and there's lots of drama. Awareness is nothing but just watching and is always just watching. Now, when we talk about the I, which one is it? Is the I the Purusha? Is the I the expression, Prakriti? I, the term I is a way of representing a very complex, shifting mechanism which is allowing us to engage in manifestation. It's not fixed, it's not static. The I you were when you were 10, and the I you are now, and the I you'll be tomorrow, the I you are in one context, the I you are in another context, it's all very malleable. So the I, the term is fixed, but the experience is being continuously reconstructed. So I is related to that, the imaginary. The ego is imaginary. It's something which we have, which has come, which facilitates our being able to participate in a whole charade. Behind the I, you have the Purusha, awareness. And this awareness, there's no I, there's no you, there's no body. But there is being. And being is experienced as awareness. So, with our practice, we're aiming to move towards being able to appreciate that I exists only as an imaginary concept. And besides I, you're not. When I has been removed, then existence stops within the imaginary. Now, all of this becomes more complicated. We have an idea of how it can become complicated because we talk about the ego. We use the word I. Simple word, I. But in the same way as when I say I'm referring to my whole medley mishmash of versions, imaginary notions of what I consider to be David. When you say I, you have your whole medley mishmash of notions of who you consider to be you. But these can never be known. These imaginings can never be known. As we said, they are given expression through the things that we do. But more significantly, they're given expression through words. using words to articulate and give an impression of who you are. Sometimes it can be to your own satisfaction. Sometimes it might not. And we can go back to our examples. You say something. Somebody asks you, tell us a little bit about yourself. And you say something. But afterwards, you reflect and you think, I got a little bit tongue tied. That's not how it was in my head. Why wasn't I able to say it the way I wanted to say it? So the words that we use to communicate to others who we are let us down. So we try again. Try to say, no, no, wait, 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 let me say again because I started off bad. I'll try and say it a bit better. So you start off and you say it again and you use other words. And you go, that was better. But the first time I said this and the second time I didn't say this. So maybe the third time I can include what I said the first time and include what I said the second time and make a better version. I can keep on going like this. But when does it stop? So words help to put down on paper, if we're going to say that. But words help to make more real what is imaginary. We try to share with one another this sense of who we are, our shared experiences, the different social contexts that we have been through, the things that we want to fulfill, our desires for the future, the different social structures that we're participating in, the rules and regulations around them, how we navigate them, all of this stuff we try to share with one another. But what I'm sharing is words. What you're sharing are words. Your experience is fundamentally imaginary. It's all in here. The words, you'll do your best to communicate it, but it might let you down because the person who's listening to them might have their own interpretation. They walk away with an understanding of you, but that will never be the full picture. Not only that, they'll give their own interpretation of what was going on and who you are. They'll give you back their own opinion, what you should have done, what you shouldn't have done, what you should have said, who you should be, what you should do, all of these things back onto you using language and words. And so they're reconstituting your own imaginary sense of self. They say, you should do this, you should do that, you are this, you're like that. And so now it's coming back at you. You had this imaginary sense of who you are, but now it's coming back that that imaginary sense of said self has been interpreted by somebody else, not fully understood, given back to you. Now you're trying to make sense of it, and now you're rebuilding up who you really are. Well, actually, what I meant to say was this, because this is who I really am. This is what I'm actually about. You didn't fully understand when I said this. And then they'll come back with another response, and it builds on. And all of this interaction just reinforces the imaginary, the ego. And so we can have conversations about our practice. I practice yoga. I practice for 1 hour in the morning, I do 1 hour in the evening, and I read this book and I keep a journal, and we can talk about these things. And then the person comes back and says, well, you know, I actually do 2 hours in the morning. You should try doing 2 hours in the morning. Have you tried this technique? And then you listen to it and then you feel like, oh, well, they didn't really understand me because I said this. They don't know me. And that what they actually meant was this. But maybe they don't. Maybe they're saying they do 2 hours, but maybe they don't do the same practices that I'm doing. And so it's all imaginary. The whole thing. Fabricated, delusional, and distracting. So, does that mean we're supposed to stop doing all of that? Does that mean we're supposed to stop these conversations? Not necessarily. Anyway, even if we decided, yes, yes, we should stop them all, cut them all out, can we? This is something that we're working through. We're working through this imagined version of who we are. We're working through it to see it for what it is, so that when we can see it for what it is, it's no longer the entirety of who we are. It's no longer how we define ourselves. Does it go away? No, it's an apparatus, it's a tool, it's a mechanism. It functions, it serves a purpose. And so we can still have conversations. And even if we want to, we can have a little bit of competitive banter. Well, no, actually, I do this. No, I do that. But if somebody says something back to us, we don't measure ourselves up in the same way. We don't substantiate, we don't reconstruct our sense of self without questioning, without seeing that the interaction, the transaction, the engaging was actually just part of a whole charade. So basically, like the actor on the stage who's finished the performance, they can come down off the stage and go to bed at night and go to sleep and not worry about what all the other actors said to them on the stage. It was part of a performance. It's not going to change them as that underlying experience of awareness that was always present throughout the performance. Now, there's a lot more that can be said, you know, and all of it was words. And they're the words that I've used. You've read books, they'll use other words, they'll explain it in other ways. You'll write things down, you'll use your own words, and you'll explain it in other ways. So we could keep going and keep celebrating this in the way that we are. All with the knowledge that there's awareness. There's an awareness of what's going on. And this type of discussion, this type of reflection is keeping us focused on that awareness, that experience of being, which is separate from all of what we're doing here. But even while we're doing all of this, we can abide in that experience of awareness. It's there. And so when the words fail me, and I don't when I don't say exactly what I want to say, or when I turn on Zoom and it doesn't work the way I want to do, and then I get a criticism, well, that's not what a master would do. Who cares? These are physical expressions, words, actions. Awareness is stillness. Awareness appreciates it all and celebrates it all. And so tuning ourselves to that awareness allows us to stay on the celebrating side of life, as opposed to the other. And I'll let you define that for yourself. I think at this point, I'll stop with my words. Ryan had mentioned to me that we might make some space for some questions. So let's see what he says here.
We can do it. Can you hear me all right? Am I coming through?
Oh, yeah, for me. Yeah.
Okay. All right. There are a few questions. And we'll start sort of at the bottom and go up. So one of the questions is you talked about the ahamkara. It is, do we come in with a blueprint of the ahamkara, or does it evolve through external pressures?
Yeah. That question goes back to like the nature nurture thing, right? Who has the answer to that?
You're the psychotherapist.
That's just point of view. Like you could come in and fight the argument on both sides. You could say, well, no, you come in and it's all preordained and you've got a blueprint set out and it all unfolds. And you could also say the other argument, well, no, he's born in certain circumstances and then the temperament but the variables are so complicated that it's very hard to justify all of that. I wouldn't claim to be able to say either way.
Okay.
Mm.
And then another question here. And this deals with the subject of shifting. It says, doesn't the experience of shifting diminish once you can sustain a state of authentic integration?
This state of authentic integration. What is integrated? Like Purusha and Prakriti, like the consciousness and the aspects of cosmic manifestation, they are integrated. It's just where we are in terms of our appreciating how they're going on. Um, like when we talk about sustained integration, are we talking about just abiding as Purusha all the time? But is that then abiding as Purusha all the time to the point where Prakriti, or the aspects of manifestation, are no longer relevant and we're not engaging with them? Um, there's a duality here going on which creates a tension. And even though we might be experienced and have had direct experience of awareness, the Purusha, and while we may still maintain this, the tension that exists within Prakriti and cosmic manifestation, that tension has to exist. So as while we are participating in it, we will always have that experience of tension. We are part of the processes of life. The difference is that we're also being able to experience Purusha, conscious awareness, but the tension won't go away unless you pick a side.
That's good. I like that. You got to pick a side. All right. This isn't really a follow up, but it's from the same person, has a similar kind of flavor to it. When you speak about quantifying, could you also say compartmentalizing?
When I said so I did mention the word quantifying, but I don't know what I was talking about. Was I talking about quantifying? I can't recall exactly what I was saying couldn't be quantified. So compartmentalizing for me would mean like categorizing, putting things in pockets. And when we talk about compartmentalizing, there's something very neat in that compartmentalizing. It's like, when you put your socks in the drawer and you can buy these little dividers to kind of put them in, everything's compartmentalized. That's what I think in my head. And categorizing. Quantifying, I think I'm talking about something similar, but all of it, I suppose, is about rationally trying to define what's going on in a very logical understanding, in an understandable kind of way. I am supposing that what I meant was that when we talk about interpersonal relationships and stuff, the variables, the complexity, how we go about trying to readjust ourselves in relation to everything we experience, all of that is very difficult to say, well, this happened, this happened, this happened, which means that this, like that kind of 2 + 2 = 4, that's very rational mind, very in line with what the ego wants. But the truth of the matter is, it's madness. Like what's going on is beyond our capacity to actually um, quantify or categorize. Yeah.
Good. And this final question, might have to do a little bit of translation here. So there's a term called para pashanti madhyama vikari. Are you familiar with that at all, David?
No.
So basically, it's the idea that there are these four stages of mind. There's that which the very inkling of a thought, and then what the thought starts to bring about as an image and an idea, then how you begin to communicate that thought, articulate it, and the actual sharing of it. So in a way, it's like the expression of, I guess, thought into speech or into action. And the question is about that. So when it comes to this idea, this sort of progression, mind to thoughts to words, and some of these thoughts are insights, but some of them are just doing what the ego does. So the question seems to be, how do you determine, who is behind that experience? Like, is it an intuitive aspect? How do you determine the intuitive versus the ego? I suppose that's how I'm interpreting this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I had never heard of that Sanskrit expression, but I think I might have read about it earlier points. But I think there's something valid here because when we talk about insight, for me, my understanding and my experience of insight is something which takes place, which is kind of undefinable. To share it with somebody else is impossible, and to kind of um, recreate the experience is also challenging. Um, so when somebody talks about how do you know the difference between the words of insight and the words of the ego mind, for me, words are the ego mind. Like that idea, which in its very, let's say, primordial sense, it may start as an image, might just be there as an image, and who knows? You see animals and stuff when they're dreaming, they're flicking their eyes. They might have these image responses that are going on in relation to stored memories that are being processed in their sleep state, and we have something similar. But when we have dreams, it's in this kind of visual. Maybe there's words in there too, but it's quite visual. It's not until we're awake and we start trying to share it with our friends and talk about it and explain it that we start putting words in it so as to make meaning of it. And I think something similar happens with insight. I remember being in CSA one time and I had a kind of very profound experience. And afterwards, I had my journal close by and I got my pen and I wrote pages and pages and pages and pages. Did those pages actually capture what I had experienced? Not a chance. But it was my way of trying to bring into a kind of a more tangible, understandable domain or register what I could relate to, is something which, by putting words in it, I feel, if I'm going to be very blunt, my ego was satisfied. My ego is kind of like, that experience was fantastic. Let's own it. Let's get control over it. You'll be able to tell other people when you have it all clear. But the actual experience didn't care about any of that. The experience was just core, without words.
Okay, we've got one more here. Let me read it. Okay. To summarize, can we conclude that we cannot get rid of the ego or conceptualizing, but try to control them to go where we need them to go?
Just say it again to summarize.
To summarize, can we conclude that we cannot get rid of the ego or we cannot get rid of conceptualizing, but we can try to control them to go where we need to go?
Yeah, this is I suppose a bit more tricky because we have willpower and we're directing our attention in certain ways, and directing the ego or conceptualizing to go where we want it to go. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. If you want to put in a window, you'll use your rational thinking to measure it out, and you'll use that apparatus of thinking mind to make that work. And then ego in that kind of circumstance of I'm positioning myself in the world as a builder who's involved in this trade and all that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, it helps us to take up a position, to kind of play a role, play a character. Um, and so I think that when somebody says to help us to direct where we need to go, yeah, that makes sense. The challenge I think facing us is how do we know where we need to go? Who makes that right or wrong? And I think this is where we experience the conflict because we're waiting for some answer from some place or some source to tell us this is where you need to go, or this is what you want to do, or this is what will be serve you most. But that's mm, you know through interpretation, maybe you'll find ways of getting that. But once it goes into word, from my perspective, once it goes into word, it's all you just basically putting words on what you're imagining. And I think that the where you need to go, you choose that. If it doesn't work out, you choose something different. And if it doesn't work out, you choose something different. But the thing that's always consistent throughout all of those experiences is the fact that you get to be the observer, the witness, something that's able to just see all that play as it's going on. And as good or as bad as it might go in terms of your ego and what you prefer to happen, that's irrelevant. The fact is that you're able to just enjoy it as an expression of life.
Yeah. Good. Well, we've got a comment I want to share, which is a longer one, and then one final question, which I think is great. So no more questions after this, because I think of David as a brother, and I like to give my siblings a hard time, and I think this is a great question to really give him a hard time. So let's start with the comment. So a comment and thank you to David. I appreciate the notion that the eye maker is constantly reconstructing itself. It feels inspiring and empowering to recognize the eye maker can shift as we develop a more supportive relationship with the sensory world as well as our internal world, the subconscious and unconscious. Creating the opportunity to become more resilient, kinder, compassionate, to become a clearer channel for spirit, to have an experience while we're interacting is a mind-body dynamic. I sense this appreciation will make it easier to step away from the eye maker during meditation. Also, I feel this speaks to the importance of mental health in yoga. So, would you like to say anything about that?
No, I think the person articulated it.
Yeah.
They've obviously been listening.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad they've been listening because the next talk that I'm going to be doing, there's a distinct component on psychological well-being as a support to actually experiencing deeper states of consciousness. So that's good to hear. But this final question, I can't wait to hear the answer. Last question, and he knows it's the last question, so this is a big one.
You're really building this up.
Yeah, I am. So to David, I'm glad it's not to me. To David, awareness is different than consciousness, comma, correct?
Yeah. Again, okay, I'll start with um, the idea, first of all, that we're using words. So I don't know, because how you use the words awareness and consciousness might be very different to the way I use consciousness and awareness. So that's the first thing. We're off to a bad footing straight away. What's blue? This picture behind me, some people might say there's more green in it than blue. Other people might say, no, it's more blue. Some people might get fancy and start using the word turquoise. Just to,
Yeah.
but to just be a bit more like to, I suppose, respect a little bit more the person's comment. Um, I do differentiate between consciousness, or being conscious and awareness, just because conscious, I think, like we think of the Purusha as consciousness, but I think more, from my point of view, use consciousness as a way of talking about that something which empowers the ego, empowers everything that's going on, something which is more likely to be fragmented by by attention being directed in different ways. So I suppose consciousness and attention, they might be more similar from my point of view. And again, not everybody might share this way of describing it. Awareness I like to keep as a word on its own. It's kind of like awareness that will never be touched. It'll never be diluted, fragmented, or broken down. It's just awareness, and it can't be messed with. So I differentiate between the two, but that's just, if you were to listen to things I say and the way I talk, you might hear more of that, but another teacher might not use it in the same way. And I think in some cases it could be splitting hairs. I encourage people to find their own words that work for them, because fundamentally it needs to work for you in order for the concept to be assimilated at a more, let's say, intuitive or innate level, rather than it just being a concept that you've heard. It needs to be embodied.
Yeah, excellent. Well done. All right. Okay, David. Well, thank you for being here today. We really appreciated it.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank
Yeah.
you. I managed to stay under the 2 hour mark, which is good.
Well, we spent a lot of time together, so I know that there's a lot of stuff for you to share. So it's okay. We set aside this time just for that. What's your website so people know?
www.davidmcgrath.ie for
I,
Ireland. Yeah.
okay. Great. So you can find David there. And if you're in on that side of the ocean, David and I have been talking about an October retreat in 2026. Are we still looking to that, David?
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
runner.
Yep. So we'll be doing that. And I'm sure David will be doing a lot more before then. So you can participate with him during his retreats too. So either way, it's been wonderful to have you, David. I'm sure we'll talk sometime soon. And I want to thank everyone for being here.
Thank you all. Thanks very much.
Take care.
Take care.
Oh, and we'll see you again at 2 p.m. Eastern time uh, with the talk I'll be giving, which will deal with how to improve your meditation practice, the real fundamentals of how to make it do what it should do. When you read books like Autobiography of Yogi, you imagine those types of things. That's what we'll be looking at. So we'll see you then. Okay.